The ship sat motionless in the middle of the Pacific, a floating fortress turned helpless giant. The USS Guardian, pride of the Navy fleet, had suffered a catastrophic engine failure. Its billion-dollar propulsion system, designed to be invincible, had gone silent. Every expert engineer, every high-tech algorithm, every elite crew member had tried, and failed. The air on the command deck was thick with tension. "We've tried everything," muttered Chief Engineer Lawson, wiping sweat from his brow. "She's dead, Admiral. This engine's fried beyond hope." Admiral Pierce stared at the blinking red lights across the console, his jaw tight. "This ship carries more than steel," he said quietly. "It carries our flag. Failure isn't an option." In the corner of the room, a young lieutenant hesitated before speaking. "Sir, there's one person who might help, but he's retired." Pierce turned sharply. "Who?" "Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cole, the machine whisperer. The man who rebuilt engines blindfolded. He left the Navy years ago." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "Find him. Bring him back." The sea roared outside, lightning flashing across the horizon, as if the ocean itself was waiting for what came next. Because sometimes, the greatest power doesn't come from machines, but from men who remember how to make them breathe again. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath the bruised sky, its waves slapping against the steel belly of the USS Guardian. Once hailed as the Navy's most advanced vessel, the ship that could outlast any storm, any enemy, it now drifted, powerless, a sleeping giant adrift in a restless sea. Inside the engine control room, alarms blared in sharp, panicked bursts. Red lights pulsed across the consoles, casting long shadows on the faces of engineers who scrambled between panels and control valves. The low hum that had always filled the heart of the ship, the rhythmic pulse of its engines, was gone. In its place was silence. "Power output is 0, sir." Chief Engineer Lawson shouted, his voice cracking over the noise. "Backup turbines are non-responsive." Admiral Pierce stood stiff near the central console, hands clasped behind his back, his jaw locked tight. His blue uniform was damp with sweat despite the chill of the air conditioning, and his eyes burned with the kind of focus that only came from decades of command. "You telling me," he said slowly, "that the most sophisticated propulsion system in the fleet is dead?" Lawson hesitated. "Completely, sir. Every diagnostic comes back scrambled. We've reset the systems 3 times, the core won't engage." A ripple of murmurs spread among the crew. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else slammed a wrench against a panel in frustration. Outside, thunder rumbled like distant cannon fire. The weather radar flickered erratically. A storm was building fast on the horizon. The Guardian had lost all thrust just hours before it was supposed to escort a medical relief convoy through the Pacific. Hundreds of lives depended on that mission. Admiral Pierce leaned forward, gripping the edge of the console. "Chief, get me options. I don't want excuses, I want power." Lawson swallowed hard. "Sir, the propulsion control module, it's burned out. It'll take weeks in dry dock to replace. We can't fix it here." Pierce turned sharply. "That's not an option. We don't have weeks. We have 6 hours before that storm hits." The room fell silent. From the corner, a young ensign, barely out of the academy, spoke timidly. "Sir, if we can't get propulsion, we'll lose steering once the storm hits. We'll be at the ocean's mercy." Pierce shot him a look that could have frozen fire. "Then we fix it before that happens." He moved toward the observation window, staring out at the churning sea. Rain streaked across the glass, turning the horizon into a blur. His reflection looked older than he remembered, lines etched deep into a face that had seen too many storms, too many good men lost. Behind him, the engineers argued quietly. "It's the control interface, I'm telling you." "No, it's deeper. The synchronization valve is misreading the core pressure. We can't even run diagnostics, the data stream's corrupted." Pierce finally snapped. "Enough." His voice thundered across the room. The chatter stopped immediately. "You're some of the finest engineers in the Navy, but you acting like cadets who've never seen failure. I want solutions, not panic." No one spoke. Then, from the communications deck, Lieutenant Harper, the youngest officer on the bridge, cleared her throat. "Sir, there might be one person who can help." Pierce turned, eyebrow raised. "Who?" She hesitated. "Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cole. Retired, sir. 20 years in the engine corps. They used to call him the machine whisperer. He saved the USS Rhino from sinking when its entire power grid blew out mid-combat. The Admiral's eyes flickered with recognition. Cole? I remember that. But he left the service a decade ago. Last I heard, he walked away after that incident. Yes, sir, Harper said softly. But if anyone can bring this ship back to life, it's him. Chief Lawson snorted, wiping grease from his hands. With all due respect, sir, that man's a relic. The Guardian systems are light years beyond what he worked on. Pierce turned slowly toward him, his gaze like iron. Sometimes it's not the tools that fix the machine, Chief. It's the hands that understand it. A crack of thunder shook the ship, followed by the long wail of the wind. Pierce looked at the radar again, the storm now only hours away. He made his decision. Get me a secure line to Naval Command, he ordered. I want Cole's location. Now. Lawson frowned. Sir, regulations. Damn the regulations. Pierce roared. We're dead in the water, and you want to quote me rule books. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Harper quickly moved to the comms terminal, her fingers flying across the keys. I'll find him, sir. Pierce exhaled, eyes still on the angry sea. Good. Tell Command to give him whatever he needs. And tell him. He paused, voice lowering, heavy with emotion. Tell him the Guardian needs her heart back. The Admiral stood there long after the crew dispersed to their stations. The low hum of emergency generators echoed faintly through the hull. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the massive ship that had once been a symbol of strength and perfection, now helpless against the growing storm. For the first time in years, Admiral Pierce felt something rare, fear. But beneath it, buried deep, was something else, hope. Because if the stories were true, if Daniel Cole was half the man they said he was, then maybe, just maybe, the Navy's dead heart could beat again. And somewhere far across the coast, in a quiet workshop smelling of oil and sea salt, a phone was about to ring, the call that would awaken the legend who once made ships breathe. The small coastal town of Port Haven was wrapped in the lazy hum of seagulls and the steady rhythm of waves kissing the shore. Daniel Cole's workshop sat right by the docks, a modest metal shack with a faded Navy insignia still etched on its door. Inside, the scent of oil and salt mingled in the air as Daniel worked silently on an old fishing boat engine. His hands, once trusted to guide some of the most advanced ships in the world, were now covered in grease from fixing small-town motors. He paused for a moment, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, staring at the calm sea beyond the window. It used to be his life, the open ocean, the sharp scent of diesel, and the sound of engines that roared like living beasts. But now, the sound of silence had become his refuge. Dad, the school bus will be here soon, a small voice called from outside. Daniel turned and saw his daughter, Lily, standing by the door, clutching her backpack. She had his amber eyes, curious, kind, and far too perceptive for her age. He smiled faintly. Don't worry, I didn't forget. Let me just finish tightening this bolt. She stepped inside, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. You always say that, and then you lose track of time, she teased, grinning. Daniel chuckled. You sound just like your mom used to. That line hung in the air. For a moment, the sound of the waves filled the silence between them. Lily lowered her eyes. Do you still miss her? Daniel exhaled slowly, his chest tightening. Every day, sweetheart. Every single day. The tragedy still haunted him. Years ago, an engine malfunction during a high-seas rescue mission had cost lives, including that of his wife, a Navy medic aboard the same ship. Though the official report cleared him of fault, Daniel never forgave himself. He left the Navy the next day and swore never to touch another ship again. Just as he was about to escort Lily to the bus stop, a black SUV pulled up near his workshop. The door opened, and out stepped Admiral Richard Halvorsen, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose very presence still commanded respect. His crisp uniform gleamed in the sunlight, the medals on his chest a quiet reminder of decades of service. Daniel froze. Admiral. Afternoon, Cole, Halvorsen said, removing his cap. His tone was heavy, but respectful. It's been a while. Daniel wiped his hands with a rag, his heart already tightening. What brings you to my side of the ocean, sir? The Navy finally running out of engines to ruin. Halvorsen gave a small, knowing smile. I wish that were the case. But we've got a situation. A bad one. Lily looked between them, confused. Daniel gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Go on, Lily. I'll walk you to the bus in a minute. When she left, Halvorsen took a slow step forward. The USS Vela, the new prototype vessel, suffered a full mechanical collapse in the middle of the Atlantic. It's dead in the water, engines unresponsive. Our best teams have tried everything, but nothing's working. We need you. Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. You've got hundreds of engineers, Admiral. What makes you think I'd be any different? Because you built her heart, Cole, the Admiral said, his voice steady. That engine design was yours. The same principles, the same core alignment. You're the only man alive who truly understands her soul. Daniel turned away, gripping the edge of his workbench. That engine, that technology, cost lives, sir. I won't touch it again. Halvorsen sighed, looking at the floor for a moment before speaking softly. You're not the only one carrying ghosts, Daniel. But this isn't about the past. There are 160 souls stranded out there, including young recruits who looked up to you once. You can save them. For a long time, the only sound was the faint ticking of tools cooling on the bench. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low and strained. And if I fail again, what then? Halvorsen met his eyes, unflinching. Then at least you'll know you tried. But if you don't go, you'll never stop wondering what could have been. That hit harder than Daniel wanted to admit. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Daniel sat alone on the porch. The sea stretched endlessly before him, the same sea that had taken everything from him, and yet it was also where his redemption waited. He ran a hand over the small silver pendant that hung from his neck, his wife's Navy dog tag. The moonlight caught on the engraved letters, "To the man who never gives up." He looked toward the horizon and whispered, "Maybe it's time I stopped running." By dawn, the sound of an engine roared to life, not a ship's engine this time, but an old pickup truck. Lily stood at the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes as her father loaded a duffel bag into the back. "Dad, are you going back?" she asked quietly. Daniel knelt, brushing her hair aside. "Just for a little while, sweetheart. There are people who need my help." She hugged him tightly. "Mom would be proud." He swallowed hard, holding back tears. "I sure hope so." As the sun rose over the water, Daniel's truck rolled down the coast road, the silhouette of a broken man on his way back to face the ghosts he once fled from. The reluctant hero was returning to the sea, and this time, it wasn't just about fixing an engine. It was about fixing himself. The USS Vela loomed like a silent titan against the restless Atlantic waves. Its steel hull shimmered under the gray morning sky, but the ship felt lifeless, like a giant with no heartbeat. As the chopper descended onto the deck, Daniel Cole stared out the window, his hands gripping his duffel bag tightly. The spray of seawater blurred his view, but he could still make out the Navy insignia painted across the deck. The sight made his chest tighten. He hadn't stood on a Navy vessel in nearly a decade. And now, here he was again, returning not as an officer, but as a ghost from the past. When the helicopter touched down, a group of officers and engineers waited, their uniforms crisp but their faces strained from exhaustion. Leading them was Lieutenant Harris, a young, confident man barely in his 30s. His arms were crossed, eyes sharp with skepticism. "Mr. Cole," Harris said, raising his voice over the rotor's dying echo. "The Admiral said you'd be coming. I didn't expect a civilian." Daniel adjusted his jacket and gave a small nod. "I didn't expect to be here either, Lieutenant. But I'm not here to salute. I'm here to fix what's broken." A few of the younger engineers exchanged doubtful glances. They'd been working around the clock for days, and the idea that an old, retired mechanic could succeed where top naval engineers had failed didn't sit well with them. As Daniel followed Harris below deck, the sound of his boots echoed against the metal corridors. Every clang felt like an echo from another life, a life he'd buried. The scent of steel, oil, and salt filled the air, and memories flooded back, the laughter of crewmates, the hum of engines, the warmth of purpose. When they reached the engine room, Daniel stopped in his tracks. The massive chamber stretched before him like the belly of a sleeping beast. The twin turbines, usually alive with rhythm, now sat silent, an eerie stillness surrounding them. The once golden pipes were smeared with oil, diagnostic screens blinked erratically, and the faint hiss of leaking steam filled the background. "This is her," Daniel whispered, almost reverently. "The Vela's power core," Harris said flatly. "Twin hybrid turbine engines. Smart control system. Designed after your earlier models, heavily modified, of course." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Heavily modified. Who? A voice rang from behind a console. That's one way to say improved. The man who stepped forward was Chief Engineer Mark Vance, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a look of irritation that could cut steel. His tone dripped with sarcasm. So you're the legend we called in? The Admiral's miracle worker? Daniel met his gaze calmly. I'm not here to replace anyone, Chief. Just to help. Vance scoffed. Help? We've run full diagnostics, replaced modules, recalibrated pressure systems, and tested every circuit. The system won't restart because the logic core keeps rejecting power input. There's nothing you can do that our AI or our top engineers haven't tried. Daniel stepped closer to the engine, his fingers tracing a faint scorch mark along one of the pipes. That's your first mistake, son, he murmured. You've been treating her like a computer. She's not. She's a living thing. That earned him a few snickers from the younger crew. One muttered, "Old man's lost it." But Daniel ignored them. He crouched near the primary turbine, listening, not to the machine itself, but to the subtle echoes in the pipes. Then he placed his hand against the metal, eyes closed. Tell me something, he said without looking up. You said the system rejects power input. Did anyone manually resync the auxiliary coolant valves before engaging? Vance frowned. No, the AI handles that automatically. Daniel smiled faintly. Not if someone overrode the manual failsafe. Which, judging by that scorch mark, someone did. Harris stepped forward. Wait, are you saying this was a mechanical failure? Daniel straightened, his expression serious now. No, it was human arrogance. The room fell silent. He turned to Vance. Someone thought they knew better than the machine, forced a power loop before the system could balance the coolant pressure. That overheat caused the cascade shutdown. You've been trying to fix the symptoms, not the cause. Vance bristled. You accusing my team? I'm not accusing anyone, Daniel cut in gently. But this ship isn't just wires and code. You have to feel her rhythm. Machines talk, Chief, not with words, but with sounds, with heat, with vibration. You just have to listen. For a moment, everyone was quiet. Even Vance couldn't argue with the conviction in his voice. Daniel rolled up his sleeves and got to work, moving with a precision that stunned the crew. He didn't consult the AI. He felt the machine, adjusting valves by touch, listening to the faint change in tone with each movement. He guided Harris through manual resets, explaining every motion like a teacher with a patient hand. This pipe hums too high, means the coolant's trapped air. Hear that? He said. Harris leaned in. I think I do. Good. Now bleed it off gently. Don't rush her. She's stubborn, but she'll come around. Bit by bit, the skeptical faces began to change. The crew who had dismissed him were now watching with fascination. After hours of work, Daniel finally stepped back, his face streaked with sweat and oil. He gave the control officer a nod. Try her now. The officer hesitated, then pressed the ignition. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, rumbling roar, the engines came to life. The entire room vibrated, not violently, but with strength and rhythm, like the beating heart of a resurrected beast. The crew erupted in cheers. Even Vance stood frozen, disbelief etched on his face. Daniel allowed himself a tired smile. Told you, he said quietly. She just needed someone to listen. Harris stepped forward, or in his voice. How did you know? Daniel looked around the glowing engine room, his old kingdom reborn, and whispered, because I built her with my heart. And you never forget the sound of your own creation breathing again. The moment was electric. But deep inside, Daniel knew this wasn't over. The engine might be alive, but the truth behind the failure, the human flaw, was only beginning to surface. And that truth was going to test every soul aboard the USS Vela. Thunder rolled across the dark horizon as waves rose like mountains, crashing against the steel walls of the USS Vela. The sky had turned a bruised gray, and the ocean churned violently beneath it. Rain battered the decks, lightning streaked across the clouds, and the storm everyone feared was now upon them. Inside the engine room, chaos brewed. The main power was flickering, and alarms blared like a chorus of warning bells. Steam hissed from cracked valves, and red emergency lights bathed the crew in a sinister glow. Despite the successful engine startup earlier, Daniel could see the readings slipping. The pressure levels weren't holding steady. Something deeper was still wrong. Sir, shouted Lieutenant Harris, clutching the rail as the ship lurched. We're losing thrust in Turbine 2. The system's rejecting manual control. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's impossible. We fixed that sink valve ourselves. Chief Engineer Vance, now more cooperative than before, rushed to the main console. If this fails completely, the ship's going to lose steering and get pushed toward the reef line. We won't survive a grounding in these waters. The Admiral's voice echoed over the intercom, calm but grave. Engine room, this is the bridge. You have 2 hours. After that, the storm will push us into the rocks. Do whatever it takes. Daniel took a deep breath, the smell of hot oil and ozone filling his lungs. 2 hours. That's all we've got. He turned to the team. We can't rely on the automation anymore. We'll do this the old-fashioned way. Harris, Vance, we'll go manual on the coolant relay. Jenkins, monitor the exhaust system. If it spikes above 1200, we're dead. The crew scrambled into motion, the roar of the storm outside mixing with a mechanical symphony of hammers, wrenches, and shouts. As Daniel worked, his mind drifted, unbidden, to the past. He was younger then, standing in a nearly identical engine room, fire blazing around him. The alarms had been just as loud, the panic just as real. He remembered a frightened voice yelling, "Sir, I pulled the wrong circuit. I can fix it." But before the young sailor could, the explosion hit. Daniel remembered diving forward, shielding the boy with his own body, feeling the searing heat tear across his back. He'd survived, but another officer hadn't. And when the investigation came, Daniel took the blame to protect the young man's career. It cost him his commission. That guilt, that heavy, quiet shame, had followed him for years. Now, as another crisis loomed, that old pain burned in his chest. Not this time. Not again. The ship rocked violently, nearly throwing them off balance. Sparks rained from the ceiling as a control box short-circuited. Harris ducked, shouting, "If we don't stabilize the secondary line, the heat's going to rupture the housing." Daniel barked orders through the chaos. "Vance, shut down the bypass valve manually. Harris, get me the auxiliary stabilizer from storage, now." "Sir, that's suicide." Harris yelled over the noise. "You'll be right next to the active turbine core." Daniel met his eyes. "Someone has to do it." "No," Harris said firmly. "Let me." For a moment, Daniel froze. The look in Harris's eyes, young, brave, and determined, was exactly like the sailor from all those years ago. He saw the same reckless courage that had once gotten someone hurt. He gripped Harris's shoulder. "You've got heart, kid. But this isn't your time to bleed for the ship. It's mine." Without waiting for an argument, Daniel grabbed his tools and ran toward the turbine housing. The floor trembled beneath him as waves slammed against the hull. He could hear the metal groan like a wounded animal. Steam burned his arms as he forced open the maintenance hatch. "Pressure at 1400. Vance shouted. "Cole, it's overheating." "I know." Daniel grunted, wrenching the valve with all his strength. "She's fighting me. Come on, girl, don't give up now." The wheel turned an inch, then another, until suddenly, the pipes hissed loudly, releasing a burst of scalding steam. The pressure gauge began to fall. "She's responding." Harris shouted from across the room. "It's working." Daniel staggered backward, coughing from the smoke. His arms trembled from exhaustion, but the sight of the readings stabilizing gave him the strength to stay upright. For a few precious seconds, hope returned, until the power flickered again. The monitors dimmed, and the lights went out completely, plunging the room into red emergency glow. "The primary generator's failing." Vance shouted. "If we lose backup power, everything shuts down again." Daniel clenched his fists. "We're not letting her die." He looked toward the manual crank system near the base of the core, a relic from older ships meant for last resort restarts. No one had used it in decades. It required raw human power. "Lieutenant," Daniel yelled, "get 2 men and meet me at the crank. We're going to hand cycle the starter." Harris looked horrified. "That'll take everything you've got." "Then we give it everything we've got." Daniel shouted back. The crew gathered around him, faces slick with sweat and fear. Together, they gripped the massive crank handle, muscles straining as they turned. The metal screeched and groaned, each rotation a battle against exhaustion and time. "Keep going." Daniel roared. "She's close." Outside, lightning struck the sea, illuminating the deck through the vents. The ship tilted dangerously as a monstrous wave hit. For a moment, the crank locked, and Daniel thought they'd lost, but then, with one final push, the turbines roared. A deep vibration shook the entire vessel. The monitors flickered back to life, showing rising energy output. The Vela was alive again. The crew collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, faces lit by the steady green lights of the control panels. Vance leaned against the wall, laughing breathlessly. "I don't believe it. You did it, old man." Daniel smiled faintly, his voice hoarse. "No, we did it. You listened. That's what saved her." Outside, the storm still raged, but the Vela no longer drifted helplessly. She was fighting back, her engines thundering with renewed life. As Daniel sank to his knees, drenched in sweat and oil, he looked up at the shaking ceiling and whispered, "Not this time, no one dies today." And in that moment, for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Peace. The storm had calmed to a gray, uneasy stillness. Rain still pattered against the steel hull of the USS Vela, but the waves had softened into heavy swells. Inside the engine room, the crew worked like ghosts, exhausted, faces smeared with oil and soot, eyes red from sleeplessness. The Vela's engines hummed faintly, but not strong enough. Something deep inside the system was still dying, and everyone could feel it. Daniel Cole stood in front of the main turbine control panel, staring at the readings with furrowed brows. Pressure was stable, temperature balanced, but the synchronization meter, the one thing keeping the twin engines from tearing themselves apart, kept flashing in erratic pulses of red and yellow. He wiped his forehead with a dirty rag and muttered, "Come on, girl. You've come this far. Don't give up on me now." Lieutenant Harris approached, holding a mug of cold coffee. "Sir, the Admiral wants an update. We're making progress, but he says we're still drifting 2 knots off course. If we don't get full thrust soon." "I know," Daniel interrupted softly, eyes locked on the trembling readings. "She's fighting something deeper. This isn't a power issue. It's in her timing. The sync valves aren't dancing together." Chief Engineer Vance stepped forward, rubbing his sore arms. "We already rechecked the synchronization circuit 3 times. It's all clean." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You checked the electrical sync, not the mechanical one. There's a hidden valve under the secondary coolant conduit, a manual override line. It hasn't been used in years. If it's jammed or broken, it'll throw the entire timing out of balance." Vance frowned. "That's impossible. It's sealed behind the core housing." Daniel's eyes hardened. "Then we opened the housing." A heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone knew what that meant. The core housing was pressurized. Opening it could expose them to live steam hotter than molten metal. One wrong move could mean death. Harris hesitated. "Sir, we can't risk losing you. You all ready?" Daniel turned, his voice quiet but firm. "Lieutenant, the Navy trusted me to bring this ship home. I won't let her sink because of Faye. I built engines like this. I know how they breathe. And right now, she's choking." He grabbed his tools and protective gloves. "You want this ship alive? Then trust me." The Admiral's voice came over the intercom just then, calm but commanding. "Engine room, this is Admiral Pierce. I'm authorizing full discretion to Chief Cole. Whatever he says, do it. No interference. If he says jump into the fire, you jump." Daniel smirked faintly. "That's one way to put it." He turned to Vance. "Keep the main pressure stable. Don't drop it, no matter what happens. Harris, be ready on the manual coolant pump. Once I fix the valve, we'll need instant balance." Vance swallowed. "Aye, sir." Daniel climbed onto the catwalk above the main engine, the heat growing with every step. The metal beneath his boots vibrated like a living thing, trembling with half-suppressed energy. He crouched down near a narrow access panel, the same one he'd worked on decades ago when the ship was still in testing. He pried it open, revealing a narrow crawl space filled with hissing steam and tangled pipes. The valve was there, a small, rusted piece of metal buried deep in the maze of conduits. Daniel reached in carefully, feeling around the scorching pipes. His gloved hand brushed against the jam valve handle. It wouldn't budge. "Come on," he whispered through gritted teeth. "You've been asleep too long. Wake up." Below, Harris called out, "Temperature rising. Sir, 1100 and climbing." "I need 30 more seconds." Daniel shouted back. He gripped the valve handle tighter, muscles straining. Steam burned through his sleeves, searing his skin, but he didn't stop. "Move," he growled. "Come on, girl." With a sudden crack, the handle gave way, but so did his balance. A burst of steam knocked him backward, slamming him against the metal wall. "Cole." Harris screamed. "Are you okay?" Daniel coughed, forcing himself up. "Yeah," he rasped. "She's open. Now, start the coolant cycle, manual override, code Delta 7. Harris hesitated. "Sir, that'll overload the core." "Do it." Daniel barked. The young lieutenant slammed the lever. The entire ship shuddered violently. The warning alarms howled. Sparks rained from the ceiling as power surged through the conduits. "Pressure at max." Vance shouted. "She's gonna blow." Daniel grabbed the intercom. "Hold the line. Don't shut it down." For a few terrifying seconds, the world seemed to stop. The turbine screamed as the sync meter flashed wildly, red, yellow, red again, before freezing on green. Then came the sound, a deep, thunderous boom, followed by the low, rhythmic roar of engines awakening from death. The floor vibrated. The lights stabilized. The warning alarms went silent. The USS Vela was alive again. The crew erupted in cheers, hugging each other, laughing through tears. Vance slammed his fist on the console in triumph. "She's running. Full sync achieved." Daniel collapsed to his knees, coughing but smiling weakly. His gloves were scorched, his shirt torn, but his eyes gleamed with quiet pride. Harris rushed to him, helping him to his feet. "Sir, you did it. You actually did it." Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "No, son, she did it. I just reminded her how to breathe." The Admiral's voice broke through the speakers again, heavy with emotion. "Chief Cole, the Vela salutes you. You just saved 200 lives, and this ship's soul." The old veteran chuckled, leaning on Harris's shoulder. "Admiral, she saved me long before I ever saved her." As the engines thundered in perfect rhythm and the ship steadied against the sea, Daniel looked out the porthole. The horizon glowed faintly with the first hint of dawn. The storm had passed. For the first time in years, Daniel felt at peace. He had faced the fire again, and this time, he'd won. He closed his eyes and whispered, almost to himself, "She's breathing again." And deep within the ship's heart, the engines roared in agreement, a sound not of machinery, but of life itself. The morning after the storm broke was unlike any the crew had ever witnessed. The sea, once a violent beast, now stretched calm and glistening like polished glass beneath a pale sunrise. The USS Guardian, the ship that had once lain motionless and near death, now pulsed with life again, her great engine thumping with a deep, rhythmic hum that sounded almost like a heartbeat. The crew moved about the deck, still dazed from the night's chaos, their uniforms soaked but their spirits soaring. And at the center of it all stood Daniel Carter, the man who had brought her back from the brink. The Admiral's voice crackled through the loudspeaker. "All hands, prepare to return home. Engines are stable, power is restored. Set course for port." A thunderous cheer erupted across the ship. For a moment, Daniel just stood there, letting the sound wash over him. The laughter, the claps on his shoulder, the shouts of, "He did it," echoing through the corridors. Lieutenant Reyes, who had once doubted the old veteran, found him near the engine room, still covered in grease and salt. "Sir," Reyes said, his voice trembling with something between awe and respect, "I've never seen anything like what you did down there. The diagnostics said it was impossible." Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "Machines can tell you what's wrong," he said quietly, "but they can't tell you how to care." He wiped his hands on a rag, looking around at the young sailors bustling with pride. "You all did the hard part. I just reminded her how to breathe again." The ship's engines roared, smooth and steady, as the Guardian began her slow, dignified journey back toward the coast. The clouds parted, revealing streaks of gold sunlight, and for the first time in days, the crew could finally breathe freely. By the time the Guardian reached port, news of the miracle had spread through every naval channel. Engineers, admirals, and technicians gathered at the dock as the great ship approached, her engines purring like a contented lion. A line of sailors stood at attention on deck, their uniforms crisp despite the ordeal. Daniel stood among them, shoulders straight, expression calm, yet deep inside, he could feel the tremor of pride returning to a heart that had once known only regret. As the ship moored, the Admiral himself stepped forward, his chest glinting with medals, and saluted. "Attention on deck," he barked, his voice carrying over the water. "This man, Daniel Carter, retired Chief Engineer, United States Navy, performed an act of brilliance that no modern system, no digital interface, could ever achieve. He not only restored the engine that drives this ship, he restored the faith that drives her crew. The crew erupted into applause. Some even shouted his name. Daniel tried to smile, but emotion caught in his throat. He simply saluted in return. The Admiral walked closer, lowering his voice so only Daniel could hear. "You know," he said softly, "machines obey logic, but it takes a soul to make them live." Daniel's eyes glistened. "Then I suppose," he replied, "the Guardian just needed a reminder of Hayes." Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed and the pier grew quiet, Daniel found himself walking along the waterfront. The sunset painted the waves in hues of amber and crimson. The air smelled of salt, steel, and victory. His steps were slow but steady, his back straighter than it had been in years. He paused at the edge of the dock, watching as the Guardian floated proudly in her berth, lights glowing like a heartbeat against the darkening sky. Footsteps approached behind him. It was Lena, his daughter, who had arrived just in time to see the ceremony. Her eyes were red from crying, but her smile was pure and bright. "I saw everything," she said softly. "They said you saved them all." Daniel turned to her, his rough hands trembling slightly as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "No," he whispered. "They saved me." Lena threw her arms around him, and for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to be held. The weight of guilt, loss, and memory that had followed him since his accident at sea years ago seemed to melt away into the ocean breeze. As night fell, the harbor lights shimmered across the water. Daniel and Lena sat side by side on a bench, watching the ship that had defined his life. "You ever think you'll go back?" she asked softly. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "No, my place isn't down in those steel guts anymore. It's right here, making sure people like them never forget what keeps a ship alive." Lena smiled through her tears. "And what's that?" Daniel looked out over the glowing ship and whispered, "Heart." The Guardian gave a soft, rhythmic thrum, steady and strong, as though agreeing. The next morning, the newspapers carried headlines that read, "Navy veteran saves $3 billion vessel with knowledge no computer could replace." But Daniel didn't care for fame. He didn't even keep the medals they tried to give him. Instead, he placed his old wrench, the one that had saved countless engines, in a small shadow box alongside a photograph of his crew and the ship's insignia. He hung it above his workbench at home, where the sunlight hit it every morning. And sometimes, when he closed his eyes and listened, he swore he could still hear the Guardian's heartbeat, calm, powerful, alive. He smiled to himself. He didn't just fix an engine, the Admiral had said that day. "No," Daniel murmured, his voice soft as the sea breeze. He reminded them what keeps the heart of the Navy beating. And with that, Daniel Carter, the man who once doubted his worth, finally found peace, not as a mechanic, not as a hero, but as the keeper of a legacy that would never fade.